Our regrets are stories we tell ourselves. When you constantly worry about your past, you're supporting that belief in your present. We were curious about what would happen if we tried to release those worries and rewrite our stories. So we decided to do an experiment.
What happens if we dedicate time to relieving our regrets? This is a show where we take a moment to reveal the messy bits about ourselves without judgment. It's a show where we can reflect, learn, grow, and maybe even laugh about our actions, attitudes, and behaviors. It's a place where we can speak about our past and learn from it. Join us on the journey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Let's Relieve Regret. My name is Victoria Muir-Bercia.
And I'm Shadoe.
And we are your co-hosts. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's do a check-in. How are you doing, Shadoe? What's going on?
I am doing all right. If I were to rank it on a 10 scale, I'd say about an 8 today. Pretty good. What's new? I'm back in the chaos of figuring out what I do with my daily life because I just finished up a seasonal gig got some new pointers on customer service that I didn't know before, and now I'm just looking forward to whatever is next. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm like a 7 or 8 out of 10. I agree with you. I mean, I didn't get to go for my walk today, and I really like to go for a walk every day, but it is minus 20 something, minus freezing to your bones, cold out there. So I'm inside. I might do some laps up and down the hallway or something, but pretty good.
That's a great idea.
Do you have a cause for applause?
Yes. So I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm constantly rearranging my apartment, trying to make it more livable for my partner and I. Something I recently found out about was something called a doom box. And I didn't know that had a name.
I don't even know what that is.
So a doom box, which at this point I have multiple doom boxes and a doom storage locker. It's an acronym for didn't organize, only moved. So yes. So some people have doom boxes because, some people are coming over and you have to clear a table as fast as you can. So instead of finding places for all the things, you kind of shove it in a box and then you put it in another room. And then when people come over, you're like, ooh, look how clean my house is. And then the point is that you're supposed to go through the doom box after and put things away from it.
Yeah, I would say I probably have quite a few too that have been shoved in closets that I forgot about, or just kind of, for sure, especially from my office.
Yes, I have a couple of office doom boxes down in the storage locker, which I would at this point call a doom storage locker as well. It's funny because some people consider the doom box as the solution. Some people consider the doom box as a temporary solution, and some people refuse to engage in doom boxes. They say, if you don't have a space for it, get rid of it. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm not quite.
What do you think it is? What do you think it is? You think it's solution?
I do. I think honestly, it's a temporary solution. You have to go back to your doom boxes after, but I think, especially as you're moving stuff around and then you can get really bogged down with if everything has to have a place, then you can't finish that room. And then that room just gets messier and messier and messier, as opposed to if you could have a couple of clean rooms and one messy room with all your doom stuff in it, there's a bit more I guess calmness to your surroundings.
I think that's what I do too, but wouldn't it be nice to actually get rid of all your doom boxes and live in that minimalist world? I think that's a goal for me. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but it's an intention. Let's put it that way.
Me too. A very good friend of mine is actually quite good at it. I I just have I feel like I just need a bigger place, but then I worry if I get a bigger place, then I'm just gonna have more doom rooms. So yeah, so my cause for applause is learning the phrase, I guess, of doom, a doom box, as a term to like help get your stuff in order, even if it's just a temporary step.
That's really cool. I feel like I just learned something because I totally do that, but it almost makes it more manageable to like have a name for it and then to know
Totally.
like there's another step. The next step is like cleaning out that box and
Right.
getting rid of things.
Right. But
Cool.
like, let's say like in my relationship, my partner and I have kind of like shared spaces and individual spaces. But every once in a while, I'm cleaning out an individual space and I find stuff that I would lovingly say is only his and not ours.
Yeah.
So I would just kind of put it in a bag and be like, look through your stuff. But now I can be like, I put a doom box aside for you and it's over there.
Yeah.
And it's just
That's
like
awesome.
it's a nice shorthand to know that other people do it too. I guess that was also kind of the
Yeah, I think
relief
I
of like
immediately
finding
feel
out
a
about
sense
it.
of relief when you said it. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
everybody does that. Right.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
what we're doing here, everybody.
For sure.
Trying to give
Um,
ourselves some relief.
yeah. What is your cause for applause this week or this episode?
Well, I think my cause for applause, I've been doing really well on not eating sugar. So in the past 6 weeks, I've been trying really hard not to eat sugar, and I've only had sugar 3 times. That includes alcohol, 3 times in 6 weeks.
Wow, that's really impressive. I think I've had sugar 3 times today.
I feel, um, which I'm going to talk about in a future episode. I've been having some health problems, but so that's part of the reason why I stopped eating sugar. I think it was just feeding my health issues, and I do feel a lot better. I feel a
That's
lot better
great.
in my body, and I feel a lot better in my mind. So that's my cause for applause, is not eating sugar. I mean, I'm still eating fruit and stuff like that, but not
Sure.
eating like refined sugar, basically, like
Cool.
sweets
Nice.
and alcohol, basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yay.
Did
That's
this
my cause
like
for
when
applause.
you bring up the alcohol thing, was it because of like a dry January kind of challenge or just kind of overall health stuff, like you said?
No, it was really just the overall health stuff. I'm not a huge, which I think I've talked about before, not a huge believer in the January New Year's resolutions, because I think we're setting ourselves up for failure and then we end up getting in that guilt cycle or regret or shame cycle. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to have small and slow solutions. And sure, January is a great time to set some goals and intentions, but I don't really like calling them resolutions or this idea of like the 1 month challenge, because usually
Right.
what happens after the 1 month challenge is you just go back to your old habits.
Right.
Right. So yeah, no, it wasn't like a dry January or anything like that. It was
Mm-hmm.
really just about me being able to cope with my body and my mind, and to
Fair
give
enough.
myself kind of a small and slow solution, or to do what I can control. Like what can I control for my health?
Right.
And this is something that I can control that's good for me, because
Nice.
there's lots of things that I can't control. Right.
Sure.
So yeah, that's where it came from.
Mm-hmm. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, should we get started with our letters to ourselves today, or do you have anything else you want to jump
No,
into before then?
let's do it.
Okay, I think you're first today.
I think so too. I think it's my turn. Um, so my theme for today is interesting. I've been thinking about this podcast a lot, and kind of this experiment that we're on about releasing things, or just, saying things out to the world, whether it's to yourself in your room or to your friend or to my friend Shadoe on the podcast, right? And like getting it out of our head. And then I think, what are the things that are in my head that I need to get rid of? Well, here's kind of the theme. What keeps me up at night? Something for you to think about, listeners. What keeps you up at night? What are those things when you're trying to go to sleep? Maybe those past memories that come up to you, like, oh man, I wish I'd said this, or I wish I'd done that. Or so this one's one of those things that keeps coming back into my head. I'm trying to fall asleep, or just, when my mind's wandering, it'll come back into my head. So that's kind of my theme for this one today. And it's also about being a woman.
That's great. Okay, wonderful. Is there anything else you want us to know before you start your letter?
No, I
Okay.
think I'll explain it or explain it in the letter.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. So I have an experience that I would like to let go of in order to move forward because it's keeping me up at night. And here it is. So I've talked about this before, but I've been rowing for over 25 years now. And for a while, I was on this really competitive masters team before COVID hit, because then I couldn't row anymore during COVID. Really competitive masters team. So masters is like over the age of 30. So it's kind of this whole other level of sport. And every sport has masters levels where maybe Olympians will go and can continue to compete after they retire, or people that have been on national teams, all the way down to people that have been in the sport recreationally and still want to compete at a really high level. So I've been on this team, and we are one of the best masters rowing teams in the world. We've won the biggest races in the world together. We've traveled the world together and competed and won, and it's really special. And we've had coaches come in and out as well. We've had blessed and lucky with the amount of resources that we've had to help us. And this story is about my role as a coxswain. So the coxswain or coxswain or cox or coxie is a person that sits at the front of the boat and strategizes and steers and calls the race and is the eyes and ears and mouth for the crew. And it's a really misunderstood role. A lot of people think you're just sitting there yelling stroke, and that's actually not what you're doing at all. You're steering a 63-foot boat with a rudder the size of the palm of your hand. It's really hard to steer, keep that boat straight. You're motivating the rowers. You kind of sound like a drill sergeant. You're looking around, you're telling them where everybody else is in the race, because they're not allowed to look out of the race. There's a lot going on, and you have to be pretty small. You have to sit in this really tiny seat, and you have to, be pretty small. So I think that one of the biggest parts about the job is motivating. So imagine you're doing a running race or you're doing something, and after the first 10 seconds, your mind and your body are just saying, I want to stop. And you have another 10 minutes to go. So you need somebody telling you, motivating you, or saying, okay, just focus on moving your legs for the next 30 seconds. Now just focus on moving your arms, that sort of stuff. So, but it's a really misunderstood role because rowers have never really experienced doing the role because they're too big to sit in the seat, to fit in the seat. And it's also the history of the role is, just throw in some small person that tried rowing and can't do it. And there hasn't really been a lot of coaching for the role and a lot of appreciation for what the role does, when really the role is like being a goalie for a hockey or a soccer team. You're either the hero if you win, or you're blamed if you lose, right? You're really critical role. So one day we were out for practice, where we always do a check-in and a check-out before practice. And I think that's one of the things that makes my teams good, because I believe in the mental preparation. And we have this coach come in, this male coach, and he's a pretty big deal. And he's kind of going down the line of all the rowers, and he's saying, okay, person in bow seat, today I want you to focus on sitting up more, and you really need to focus on your speed of your hands at the finish. So he's kind of going along the line, giving everybody kind of a personal focus, and then giving the whole crew a focus for the practice, because we're getting close to one of our big races before we get out on the water. Really hard for a rower to understand what it's like to be a coxie. And he's also from the older generation when coxies weren't valued. And then he looks at me and he says, Victoria, your job is to not be bitchy. And at the time, I just took it. I was in my head, I was like, that's all you have for me? Okay, great. Whatever. Let's have practice. And then we all get into the boat and we go, right? And that keeps me up at night. And that was like, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. The consequence of me. So usually we say what the consequences of holding on to this like worry or regret or belief. But this one for me is the consequence of me not speaking up for myself has caused the worry and regret for me. Especially as a woman, as like an old white dude telling me not to be bitchy, first of all. And also my role in the sport is also a misunderstood role. There's a lot of people that really appreciate Coxies now. Like the culture really is changing, but it's almost the same as like the Me Too culture with Coxies. I don't want to compare them, but it's almost like people are starting to appreciate it, but there's a lot of work to go. And I still think about it. I still think what I should have said was, no, you do not get to use the word bitchy to describe me or my actions. You, as a powerful, older white man, don't get to use that language with me. And you're supposed to be supporting this crew in its entirety. You've given everybody else constructive criticism. Not even criticism. You've given everybody else points of focus to make them better. And if you don't understand my role, don't say anything. Ask me, what is it like to be a Coxie? Or what are you going to focus on today, Victoria? You tell me. But you don't get to say to me, your role today is to not be bitchy. Because that's everything that's wrong with the labels that Coxies get anyways. It's like your job is to just get in there and be bossy. No, my job is to get in there to strategize. There's 9 people in the boat to strategize, to motivate, to steer, to be a part of the team. And as soon as you use language like that, you're othering me. I didn't get coaching. I got don't be bitchy. And I feel so disempowered even telling the story. I regret not saying something. But then when I think of this story in my head, I'm like, but then if I'd walked away and been like, no, you don't get to talk to me like that, he'd be like, what a bitch. Right? It's like this catch-22. So in closing, I did everything I could in that moment with the tools I had at the time because I froze. And we all have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And I think we forget about the freeze response, which is part of it. We just call it fight or flight, but it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And I froze mentally. And it was also a time in my life when I had just kind of was going through a really big burnout from work, which I've talked about before. And so it was kind of all around that same era. And that's who I was then. And I've grown now. And I have to let it go so that I can sleep at night. But I know that there have been other moments in my life since then where I have stood up for myself as a woman against preconditioning and preconditioned biases. So I have to let it go. So I'm letting it go. So I'm relieved that I've spoken it out loud, and I'm actually relieved that people are going to hear it. People are going to hear me say the story on this podcast. And if you're a rower and you're in the rowing world, there's a lot of preconditioned biases in the rowing world too. And I think in a lot of sports. So I feel relieved now that I put it out there, that it's out of my head and I've said it out loud, because I've never told this story out loud before, actually. And I know that I'm worthy of respect and love and care as a woman and as a rowing coxswain. And that is my story.
Thank you for sharing. That was really interesting and powerful and dynamic and all the things I think you are as a person. Actually, that was a really, really good one. Do you want to discuss this further, or do you want to share it and park it?
I'm interested in your feedback, actually.
Oh, great, because I have lots.
I think it's a good conversation to have, because hashtag Me Too happened, but in like the real world we're living in is, what do we still do as the culture still changing? Because the culture is still changing. So I'm interested in your thoughts.
I'm glad you brought up it being a catch-22, because that is something I wrote down. Like, that's one of those phrases that someone says, like, not just to be unhelpful, but to lock you in your place. Because like you said, like you could have said nothing, which is what you chose to do. You froze and said nothing, which I don't see. I think that would have been the safest way to go about it at the time, because like also you're saying you're just ahead of a big competition, like you don't want to cause more drama on the team, and you don't want to, like, unfortunately, like, prove him right, which is gross.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, it's such a weird way to like speak to someone, especially, and not even like, it's a weird way to speak to someone even if you're not their coach. And like, as a coach, it was so wrong. Like, and I'm sorry that you went through that.
Oh, I have many stories too. That's just one story, to be
Yeah,
honest with
for
you.
sure.
But about almost all the coaches I've had as a rowing coxswain, actually all the male coaches I've had. But yeah, sorry, you'll go on.
No, and I was going to ask you too, like, as someone who also had to do the motivating, where do you think the line exists between like that tough love and bullying, I guess, is like,
Yeah,
or do you
that's
even think
really,
there's a room for tough love, like, or
I
is
I
that
don't
kind
I
of
don't think there's
outdated?
room for, I think tough love's outdated.
Okay.
I'll talk to it from a rowing perspective, from a coxing perspective. Um I think that that it that tough love kind of, like, imagine you're in a race, like we know so much more now from like sports psychology. I mean, everyone here knows that I'm a life coach as well, and I really like focus on human behavior and the brain and how that works, and we know that it doesn't work. We know that fear driven motivation doesn't work. We know that it doesn't work in the long run. So there's a difference between me motivating in the boat and saying something like that's factual, that's not a tough love thing, versus a like, you suck, get better, right?
Yeah.
Or saying, okay, we're about a foot behind that other boat, so that's true, it doesn't feel good to know that you're behind, but for the next 5 strokes I really want you to push on your legs and let's close that gap. There's a difference between doing that and saying, hey, your stroke really sucks right now, just fix it. Right. There's a huge difference. But I think, like, 30 years ago or more, that was how motivation was. It was about, tell me everything I'm doing wrong and then I'll try my best to do it right. And then you're kind of setting up your athletes to just always feel like they're not good enough and to always want to do it right. And the way that I cox, I know, guys, if you don't know this language, you're just listening to these words like, what is it? So cox is a noun and a verb. The way that I cox is that, be factual about that, and then add in the motivating stuff. Like, you did that really well. That stroke was really good. Yeah, that was awesome. Right? Like, there's a difference. And I also think that it's changed because rowing was a very male dominated sport. And that's how men talk to each other sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might be a really big blanket statement. So I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, human beings, all of our brains need to be motivated. But that was the culture then of how men talk to each other in the 40s, in the 50s. That's how we motivated. Drill sergeant. We were coming out of World War II, and that's remained in the culture. Right. But the thing is that it actually, science tells us it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't
For
work.
sure.
So I don't think there is a place for tough love. I think there is a place for factual motivation and truth. The truth is, we're behind in this race right now. What are we going to do to get ahead? That's different from tough love.
Right.
And I don't even like using the word tough love, because love is something that's beautiful and encouraging and motivating.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give it the real word, or another word.
Right.
It was belittling demotivating, discriminatory in some ways towards me, those are the real words. Those are the real words.
For sure. I've kind of like a question that's more just technical about rowing, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
So I think about like the fact that there are rowing machines, and there's also like there's ways that you can practice your rowing in a pool. Is there ways to practice coxieing that way? Or how would you practice?
The only way you can practice steering is in a boat.
Right.
And in terms of the motivation and the yelling, like if I play you a recording, I'll find one and we'll play it one day. I sound like, you'll be like, that's not you. That's not your voice. I really do sound like a drill sergeant. My voice is like really low and deep. And you're like, you'll be like, that's not you. So you have to learn how to train your voice. So in terms of coxing, it's almost the same as a singer. You have to learn how to protect your voice. You have to have vocal warm-ups. You have to know how to protect your voice. You have to know how to manipulate your voice so that it can get deep. Because when you hear like a deep, powerful sound, that motivates you. You have to play with sound. So I play with sound, not just words. I might say things like cha, or try and emulate what the boat sounds like when it sounds good. But really you do that alone. You do a lot of that alone. And in the past, now I'm a really big advocate as a coxie. If there's younger coxies that want to be coached, I will ask to come out in the coach boat with their coach. So when you're in a practice, your coaches follow you kind of in like a little tin fisherman boat, like fishing boat.
Yeah.
Like an engine boat. And I go out and I coach coxies, and I also coach their coaches how to coach them, because usually coaches have been rowers, not coxies.
Right.
And I'm a really big advocate for that, because rowers don't know how to coach coxies because they've never done it. They've never done it. And they assume that it's easy.
Right.
That's the assumption, because coxies used to be treated like, oh, just put it, like seriously, at the Olympics, they'd be like, oh, just put anyone in that seat. It's fine. At the Olympics. I wish I could have been a coxie in like the 50s, so that somebody would have been like, oh, just throw Victoria in that seat and she'll make the Olympic team. Like that would like, that's what it used to be like. Just throw this lightweight rower in there and it'll be fine. And then they started realizing that it's actually not that easy, and you can't just throw anybody in the seat because they can't steer in a straight line. They can't say the right things. They can't get the timing, like all those things. But it's really solitary too. And so you need to get coaching from other coxies, or not even coaching. You need to talk to each other and say, this works for me. What works for you? Because most of the coaching we've gotten is from rowers, and that's really important because we need to know how to row and how to be technical so that we know what to say.
Right.
But that can only take you so far. Yeah, it's a very solitary thing. Good question. Thanks.
Yeah. It makes me think about like, how could we improve that relationship? So like my brain immediately goes to something like a coxie simulator machine, like similar to like a rowing machine, where like you have to like sit on it a certain way and steer it with like some sort of resistance.
I'm loving this idea, Shadoe. I'm loving it. Maybe I'll invent it.
Maybe because like not only could the person who needs to coxie practice, then like all the rowers like have to do it once a month to like respect the coxie. Or
that you know what I mean. One of the other things is that a rower can't get into the coxie seat. Like, okay, so I'm like 5'1". And I fit in this little seat in the back of the boat. Well, my rowers are all like close to 6 feet tall.
Right.
They can't fit in it.
Yeah.
Their hips are too wide. Kind of like I'm sitting in the thinnest part of the seat, right? Like,
they need some kind of like simulation machine that like works those muscles and puts them in, and then like not only will they not like it, then you get to also say like, also you would have to be a lot more squeezed in than you are on the simulator.
And also the other thing is,
I don't know,
people think coxies aren't athletes. They're like, oh, you can just throw anyone in there. My abs are flexed for the entire race. So imagine doing a plank or a V-sit. It's essentially a V-sit, but I say plank because it's the same muscles. So we do long distance racing. which is kind of like cross country racing. You do it down a river, you go off one at a time, and these races are long. They're like 5 kilometers long.
Yeah.
So can you do the plank for 16 minutes?
No.
Because that's what a coxie's doing. They're
Right.
squeezing their abs and yelling and steering and having to use their brain power and be really focused. Depending on the kind of race, from anywhere from 6 to 16 minutes.
That's wild. And again, I thank you for illuminating a lot of this for us, because I think I really liked your point too about how it's almost like being the goalie, because like there's a lot of like blame on your head if it goes wrong. And then also like if it goes right, there's like no recognition.
Well, if it goes right, there is recognition. There's a lot.
Well, that's good. That's
good. But if it goes wrong, it can be pretty bad. Yeah, it can be pretty bad. And or if it goes right, there's recognition, but also sometimes there's not. You're right. It's like the whole.
Well, I'm just wondering because like there's things like with goalie stuff too. Like at least you see the goalie the whole time, so like that is a very visual thing where like your position you're talking about like being invisible in a way, and like similar to like a backstage crew at any kind of performance, or like the corporate team of any business, really, because like not really the corporate part, but the administrative part. Like I've always had, like I had a really good boss once who talked about how people only notice admin when it's going wrong.
Yeah.
If people don't say anything about admin, you have excellent admin.
So that's like part of the culture. You know, that question about tough love. That's a big part of, I think, sport culture, not just rowing, but sport culture and elite sport culture is we only, up until the event, we only talk about what needs to be fixed. Right. And then we celebrate the medal winners, and then everybody else is a loser. Right. Now, I like winning, and I like winning gold medals, and it's fun. Okay. And I believe in a medal system because I believe that we should celebrate the hard work that the best do. Like, I don't believe in everybody sit in a circle and we all get participation medals, not at elite level sports. Okay. I'm talking about elite level sports. But it's also, if you spent your whole life prepping for a moment, but how you prepped was focusing on what you're doing wrong, that's some serious programming in your brain, right? And it's the same in life, exactly what you just said. We only notice the bad. We don't point out the good. We need to point out the good more, because that can be more. Studies now show us that can actually, in the long run, that motivation lasts longer. Fear-based motivation only lasts 1 to 2 weeks if you're using fear to set a goal, because the part of the brain where the fear-based emotion is coming from, or motivation, doesn't actually connect and create pathways that can create motivation that is long-term. We need to have a mix of both. And I would even say like 80-20 rule, 80% focusing on the positive, 20% focusing on what needs to be fixed, because we need to train our brains to move our bodies, or whatever it is. If it's admin work too, like what you're saying, it's interesting, a really good point.
Yeah. Cause it's, again, like with admin work, it's like, no one notices it. Like they just assume that they're going to get paid on time. They just assume that they're going to have an access card day one. They just assume things are going to get signed on time. You know what I mean? There's just all this assumption, but it's invisible. So people don't even know when it's happening properly. So
how often do we say thank you?
I think it's similar to people who like, I still feel very strongly about this. I feel like everyone should have to do either a restaurant or a retail job in their life. And so similarly, I think the people who've done admin work say thank you to the administrators. People who have done coxieing probably know how to recognize coxies and goalies and all these other things that we kind of just ignore, because not just the fear-based excitement, but like the excitement of the now and like what I can see is more like not valuable, but like perceived as such.
Yeah. I'm just putting it out there. I'm putting it out there to all listeners. Like, thank you is a sentence, right? You don't have to thank you, period. Just use the words. Just use the words thank you a lot. It can go a long way and make people feel appreciated and valued and validated. Yeah. Thank you for those really good questions and for being interested in my sport, Shadoe, in my unique sport that not a lot of that isn't, as popular as hockey or soccer or something. But thank you for those questions.
As a former Excalibur, or I guess you're an Excalibur for life, Trent is known for its rowing. So rowing was a big deal when I went to university. Not that I ever rowed, but we would line up on the bridge and cheer our team on and stuff.
Well, that race that's held at Trent University, Ontario, Canada, for those of you listening. I grew up in Peterborough. I didn't go to Trent, but I grew up in the town, and that's why I started rowing, because Peterborough is a big rowing city. So Trent, instead of football as its homecoming, rowing is its homecoming weekend. But that race, I don't know if you know, it's called a head race. So what I was saying, that long distance racing, right? Where you go down a river one at a time and whoever gets the fastest time wins. That race, up until 3 years ago, they split it into a 2-day race, but it used to be a 1-day race, was the largest 1-day race in North America. It was one of the biggest races in the world. Isn't that cool?
Very cool.
In my little hometown of Peterborough, Ontario.
And when you're an undergraduate student, it's the day that you find out exactly how much beer you can drink in a 24-hour period.
Yeah, let's just all tell you, everybody, that race has a beer tent at the finish line. We'll just leave it at that.
It has a beer tent that opens at exactly 11 a.m. that I have stood in line for more than once.
Oh, yeah. I've done that race 20 times. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, amazing. I even have Head of the Trent mugs here in my kitchen. So, yeah. Amazing. Well, what a good share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Would you like to share yours? Does it connect in any way, or is it totally opposite? Because again, everybody,
really
it's a surprise.
You don't know what we're listening. Fits. And I think, I think I'll just get into it. I don't think I'm going to prep it in any way.
Okay, good. Okay, I am listening.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So, I have an experience I need to let go of to move forward. I regret bullying others. The height of this was in high school, but I leaned on it throughout my 20s as well, especially for a cheap laugh with a new group of people. The consequence of holding on to this regret is that I think about it constantly. I don't know how to reach out to the ones I knowingly hurt. Also, I don't know how to comfort them if I did. On top of that, it's most likely that there are many others I hurt unknowingly. Another consequence that this knowledge has for me is that it holds me back from putting more of myself out there. A question I think a lot about is, what if I accidentally create something that will be hurtful? Even worse, what if it's not hurtful now, but it's perceived as hurtful in the future, or I just don't even know how it's hurtful, and I'll be ignorant of causing someone else harm. I forgive my younger self for knowingly bullying people. I think I was reacting to a pressure cooker environment. And again, the laughter from other people was such a balm that I used to soothe my own wounds. I'm hopeful that my future self will forgive my current self for the times I do it unknowingly as well. I did everything I could in those moments with the tools that I had at the time, and that's okay. That is who I was then, and I've grown in so many ways. I'm relieved because I am now capable of accepting feedback and looking critically at how my actions, attitudes, and behaviors impact those around me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Shadoe.
It's a short one, but it's important.
It's important. It's humbling, and it's important to demonstrate being humble, and you've just done that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like feedback, or would you just like to be heard?
No, I think I could accept some feedback on this one. I specifically call out how good I am at it. So let's bring it on.
again, I want to point out like how brave it is to be able to say that, I bullied, because we've all bullied someone. None of us are perfect. We've all done it in our lives. Whether we learned it from pre-programming, from observing things as a child, from, the older we get, the more culture changes around things. What was culturally appropriate 40 years ago isn't culturally appropriate now. And I think you make a really good point in that it holds you back from putting yourself out there, because what if I say something now that 10 years from now is hurtful? And I think it's a really important discussion to have, or thing to put out there, because I think a lot of people are feeling that way. In my point of view, I think the most important thing is acknowledging behavior within ourselves. And I think you just did that as a beautiful demonstration. And I hope that would follow you in a good way, right? So
Yeah.
I hope that it would help you I hope that it would help you put yourself out there, because I think people really appreciate the acknowledging your behavior, right? But I do have a question.
Sure.
The bullying for a cheap laugh, that was the culture then. So my curious question is, how long ago was it?
Oh, I mean, I think even recently as like 2-3 years ago, I was still engaging in this behavior, not all the time, but like especially if I was ever nervous or in a new, it's like I bring up in the letter, like anytime I was in a new group of people, I found that was the easiest way to fit in, was to like figure out which way I could like get people to laugh. I've found other ways to make people laugh now, which aren't rooted in being mean to somebody else in the room. But also I have to like acknowledge that I have this compulsive need to be seen as funny. And it's like almost like this rent I pay when I'm in new rooms, because it's like it's born out of this insecurity that like I don't belong there. So I should be the funniest person, or I should be like the most something, so that people are more comfortable with me being like with me sharing their space. And it's something I'm investigating within myself right now.
I'm gonna say something hard to hear.
Okay. Yeah.
Or maybe not hard to hear, but I think it's important for listeners to hear this and to hear me say this to you. You deserve love no matter who you are. You don't have to be a character. And I think a lot of us do that, right? So I'm the jokester. I'm the funny person at the party. I have to fulfill that role. And if I don't fulfill that role, nobody will like me.
Totally.
And that is simply not the truth. And you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, in whatever mood you're in. And we need to remember that our moods are who we are, and we can have good moods and bad moods, or not even good and bad. I don't like doing good and bad.
Right.
We can have high energy and low energy.
I was also thinking about it in terms of energy. Yeah. Because I know like when I have a low energy mood, I guess I also get, this is kind of like part and parcel of like the bullying thing, but I tend to have influence even if I try not to in groups of people. So my emotion tends to be contagious. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to be an uplifting emotion. And if I feel like I can't be that uplifting emotion, I'll just not go. Like I called in, we were just saying, I just had this seasonal gig that lasted November to February. And I called in a bunch of times just because I couldn't be the character that day. And I didn't want to bring the whole team down with my sour mood.
So you take on the responsibilities of the group, right? When nobody's asked you to take on the emotional responsibility of the group. And I also think, that's kind of part of this podcast, is Shadoe and I being vulnerable with each other and allowing people to kind of be a fly on the wall and listen to our conversations about this. So you're doing it right now, and I'm really proud of you, and I love you,
Thank
right?
you.
People are going to listen to this episode and they're going to see this side of you too. And
Mhm.
both sides are equally as lovable,
Mhm.
right? So,
Oh, that's nice.
anyways, we're not going to solve it today, but it's
No.
something that I just wanted to say to you because I know you're working on it, but I wanted to validate you working on it.
Mhm. I really, oh,
And
go ahead. Sorry.
no, say what you're going to say.
No, I was just going to kind of bring up something that has come across my radar recently, is that Brene Brown no longer believes in sarcasm as a way to communicate with each other. And that's going to be really hard for me to give up. And even like, I know I don't have to do it all the time and I don't have to give it up all the time, because in some environments, sarcasm is a life raft. But you know, it's so interesting. Like when it was first like brought up to me, I had a sarcastic kind of reaction when I saw that she said like, I'm not going to be doing sarcasm anymore. And I was like, okay, Brene, let's go. But like the more I think about it, the more she's so right. Like it's mean for your own ego boost. Like
Yeah.
it's othering. It's you know, similarly to like even the coach who said, oh, don't be bitchy. Like even if he thought he was being sarcastic, like
He
that's
wasn't, but
not,
yeah.
yeah, no, oh yeah, totally. I don't like, I think he was way out of line, but I'm just trying to think of like, you know, other examples where I've definitely just been sarcastic because I thought that, I don't know, I thought the moment called for it. And now I'm realizing it's more rooted in, again, my compulsive need to be seen as funny.
So again, I think the other interesting thing is as these conversations come up is acknowledging is really important, and you're doing that. And you and I are doing that every time we meet to record episodes of this podcast. It's about how we move forward, right?
Yeah.
And so it can take a really long time to move forward. Acknowledging that you're in the healing process is important, and acknowledging that it's going to take steps and more steps and maybe more steps. And that's okay, that you don't have to change right away or heal right away, but that you're acknowledging that you're doing the work and you are striving for change. And so I want to acknowledge that for you. And so I want to ask you, is there anything that you would like to say to anybody out there that you feel you've bullied, or a general blanket statement because you're putting it out in the world and people are hearing it, to give you that opportunity?
That's really sweet of you. There's of course specific people that I would assume don't even follow me or are interested in what I'm doing in my life. So I don't want to call out specific people. There's two specific people in my mind that are just blaring in my mind's eye. But again, like I can't be egotistical enough to think that they are even thinking about me. Like I'm hoping that they've moved on from anything like that. And I also like to excuse myself that I wasn't the only one. But
no,
like,
of course you weren't. But
you know, but like that's not enough.
That's not enough.
That's not enough of a reason. And then I worry that a blanket statement isn't good enough. Like I don't want to just be like, I'm sorry if you were hurt by my actions, because that's not real. And that's not,
why isn't it
I don't
real?
know.
If you are genuinely sorry, why isn't it real?
It just feels like a get out of jail free card to just say, oh, I'm sorry, and like move on. Like I would want to have one-on-one conversations. Of course, yes, okay. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry about it, but I feel like I said in my letter, I just feel like it's almost too cheap to say like just, oh, I'm sorry like that, and that should be enough for the people I've hurt. I would want to be able to like listen to them and really hear how I hurt them, and like and also if that's even what they want. Like that's something I have to consider is like,
that's a really good point.
Am I wanting to actually relieve their pain, or am I trying to relieve my own pain through that apology?
Yeah.
And like, that's not fair. That further hurts them. So I don't know.
Okay. Here's my last question.
Okay.
How do you feel after reading the letter?
Weirdly, I still feel like if it wasn't not just like I don't know, I almost wish I didn't know how hurtful it was, because I do feel like it's still in some environments such an easy way to gain social acceptance. And it's hard for me to give it up as an identity.
Are you changing?
Yes.
Okay.
And lots of times even like, even if I think of mean things, like I don't say them out loud because I say a lot of mean things to myself.
I think everybody says mean things in their head though.
Yeah.
The difference is saying it in your head and saying it out loud. And I
Totally.
think we really guilt ourselves when we say mean things in our head.
Right.
And something that I've been learning to do is I say the mean thing in my head. I forgive myself for the thought. Like I literally say in my head, okay, you thought that. I forgive you for the thought.
Right.
This is really what you want to be thinking, or this is really what you meant.
Yeah.
And it can be very powerful actually, because if not, then I'm like, oh, you're such a bad person. Why would you think that in your head? And you start like guilting yourself, right? Forgive yourself for the thought. We're human, man. We're complex. We're complex. Our thoughts are complex.
True.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of like bias training and stuff will tell you that your first thought is the preconditioned thought. And then usually like your second thought is your real thought. And I think a lot of times we flip those. We think our first thoughts are a real thought, and that the second thought's like our conditioning thought. But really,
I think that's so important. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I think I needed to hear that. And I think people need to hear that. I thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Because we're products of our environment, our media environment, anything else like that. So like if you grew up in the 90s like I did, like, and you watched a lot of sitcoms like I did, and you watched a lot of stand-up comedians like I did, it was just like, again, like you were saying earlier, like that is just how it was. Or like being at the beer garden at Head of the Trent and like crushing so many beers, man, and like calling people who couldn't drink that much bad names. Like, what the fuck is that about? Like, that's just, again,
it's a dangerous culture, right? But that's the culture that we were in when we were in uni, right?
And I hope that that's going away. But also, I selfishly, I also know I had good times. So it's like, I don't even know anymore. Like, yeah.
Well, I think the key is to not judge yourself for who you were in the past, right? And that's the whole point of what we're doing here, is to kind of release the judgment we have on ourselves. So again, I want to thank you for being so brave in admitting that you've bullied people in the past, because I have to say it, we've all bullied someone in our past, but to stand up and then to admit it and to explore it and try and figure out why and to commit to change is brave. So thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we do our closing?
I guess.
So everybody, as long as you're not driving, please join us in our 3 breaths to release regret or anything else you need to release. If you want to make sure your feet are on the floor, and know that the earth is underneath you, supporting you. Gravity is always supporting you. So just feel your contact points, whether it's your bum on your chair or your feet on your floor, and know that gravity is always supporting you. Put one hand on your heart and take a big breath and say to yourself, I release pressure and expectations. Take another big breath. I relieve my regrets. My past does not define me. Another breath. I look forward to moving forward, to moving on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We love you. We appreciate you so much. Thank you to my co-host, Shadoe. I love you and I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you even when you are being bitchy.
Oh, thank you. And there comes the sarcasm.
Okay, sure. Thank you sarcasm.
So
No, for real. I do love you a lot. I just had to get that in there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
It made me laugh. I still have a bad sense of humor too, then I guess. All right, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
This episode of Let's Relieve Regret was produced by Shadoe Ball and Victoria Muir-Bercia.
Editing by me, Victoria Muir-Bercia.
We are an independent podcast supported by you, our listeners.
If you think this podcast sends a valuable message, you had an aha moment, or learned something new about yourself, help us realize our goal of reaching as many listeners as possible.
We encourage you to take action and support us right now by choosing one of the following options.
You can easily support us by
following us on Instagram at relieve.regret.
Tell 2 friends.
Leave a 5-star review on whatever app you're listening to us on.
Leave a tip at coffee.com/Let's Relieve Regret podcast. That's ko-fi.com/Let's Relieve Regret podcast.
Join our conversations in the Facebook group, Let's Relieve Regret Podcast.
Find all this information, all the links, and more in the podcast notes. Okay, bye.
Bye.